the way we treat people. You don't need government to tell us to do that. And Darfur is the same principle as getting involved for military reasons. It might be humanitarian reasons, but it sounds like good intentions, and it may well be good intentions, but it doesn't work that way, because if you send food over there and put it out there, no matter who you give it to, the strong arms get it. And they use it as weapons. Whoever's the strongest takes everything we send them. You give it to the government, you have to pick which side you're going to give it to, so you're involved in a civil war. So we should be humanitarians, and if we are truly prosperous and there's some real suffering over there, individuals as well as the Bill Gateses of the world, we'd have more money, not less. It would be distributed and probably more fairly, rather than us getting involved, passing out political tools and just increasing the chances of these wars spreading. There's not much evidence that any of that's been very successful. You can't say none of it ever helped, but basically it doesn't work. We don't have the authority to do it. It doesn't work well, and we're also broke. And it's not like all our aid would dry up. I mean, the American people are very, very generous, and I think people who really suffer would get help from Americans.
Well, Congressman, what's the limit on your commitment to lack of American intervention in the world? What would be acceptable? For instance, was it appropriate to intervene in Kuwait when it was invaded by Iraq?
No.
You would have just let Kuwait fall as an Iraq state?
Well, yeah, but what might have happened? Who wanted them in there? Not one Arab nation wanted them in there. And Israel didn't want them in there. The Iranians didn't want them in there. Maybe the United Arab League might have talked to Israel, and I think they'd have gotten them out of it. And I think they'd have taken out Saddam Hussein, and we wouldn't have had this 15 more years of killing and war. So there are other alternatives. And I think we've done so much damage to Israel because we take away all their sovereign rights to make these determinations. We subsidize them. We weaken their economy because they don't have enough incentive to take care of themselves, because they become more socialistic. If they want to deal with their neighbors in a friendly way, we object. If they want to deal with Syria and talk to them, they say, "Oh no, you can't do this." Or if they want to be tougher, we restrain them. When war breaks out there, don't do it, this will expand it. And they sell their sovereignty out to us. They can't say a word. If we're not there, Israel have a greater motivation to do what they need to defend themselves, and also they'd have a greater motivation to talk to more moderate nations. And I don't know why the United Arab League, with Israelis' power, couldn't have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein quickly, and not the way we attempted to do it, because we didn't declare war. We really didn't win the war, because we're still fighting that same war. And if let's say it was argued that it's our national security interest to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, it doesn't mean that I, as a president, has the final answer. Actually, the people have the final answer in the Congress. You shouldn't pretend that it's not a war and say, we're going to go in, but it's not a war. We got to go in because the UN tells us to. Well, you say to the American people and to the Congress, if you think this war is important, declare the war, fight it, and get it over with. And who's the enemy? Is it Saddam Hussein? You don't do a half a war. You don't just push him out and bomb and kill a bunch of civilians and not kill Saddam Hussein, which is, the shortcoming of the policy.
Congressman, you spoke of devaluing currency earlier. You advocate going the gold standard. Could you explain how that would work and what that would mean to the economy?
Well, it means that the government has no right to devalue your currency, which they do constantly, because it's your money, you've earned it. Just in these last weeks, our dollar has gone down precipitously. So if you'd happen to have had a CD in the bank, you might have lost 10% of your money. And it's a deliberate policy. It's done by the Federal Reserve in a secret fashion. It's done to serve the special interests. It's done to serve the interests of big spenders who can't tax anymore and can't borrow anymore, so they just create the money. Low interest rates means creating new money, debasing the currency. The founders understood this very clearly. That's why they said there shall be no emitting of bills of credit, and that only gold and silver could be legal tender. They knew about runaway inflation of the continental dollar, and they were arguing against it. And monetary history shows that paper money never lasts, and it ends badly, and it's the empire that usually drives the currency down, and that's what we're in the midst of. And if we're perceived as a weak military power and we have a bad recession, it's this perception of military power that we're invincible, as well as an economic power that we're invincible. That sort of gives a value to currency, maybe unearned value. But you can have an unearned value to currency if the perceptions are right. But right now, perceptions are changing because the currency really isn't backed up by anything. So a gold standard literally restrains government growth, and it protects the people who save money, and also eliminates the business cycle, because the business cycle is created by the Federal Reserve manipulation of the currency. The Federal Reserve created the NASDAQ bubble, and they created the housing bubble, taking interest rates down to 1% and saying interest that you can get a house for under 4% or under 5%. And true market interest rates weren't that low. So no wonder people overspeculated. So the debasement of currency is the issue of our times that will be on our plates that we'll have to deal with, whether we want to or not, because it can't be maintained. The question is how do you do it? And my approach to that is that you just legalize a competing currency rather than trying to close down one system overnight. Just if you wanted to go to the bank and save in a gold bond instead of a paper bond, you'd be allowed to. But today you can't do it because of our tax codes. They won't allow you to do it.
Congressman, I usually ask a question from our readers. This is a question we asked another candidate or other candidates, and that was, if you had been president during 9/11, what might you have done differently than President Bush did?
Well, I did authorize the authority to go after the individuals we believe did it. I would have done it differently. I would have concentrated on that, and I wouldn't have gotten into nation building in Afghanistan or in Iraq, and I wouldn't have depended on Pakistan and the Northern Alliance to do our job at Tora Bora, and we lost, and he got away. I would also have followed up on a bill that I introduced, which was called issuing a letter of marque and reprisal, which is something that Congress can do. And that was used in our early history to go after stateless criminals like the pirates. And the best example of how that might have worked would be to see how a Ross Perot dealt with his hostages versus how our government dealt with our hostages in Iran. And he was rather successful. But the letter comes from Congress. It says that private individuals can be authorized, and it's your job to go out and get them. And I think, to me, it's different than the mercenary approach of what's happening in Iraq right now, where Blackwater and Halliburton's, I don't like any of that. This would be much more specific. They have very strict rules against not breaking the law, and it was an international agreement that it was used to do this. So I would place a lot more confidence in a Ross Perot approach to going after a band of individuals that orchestrated that against us.
Congressman, during your career, you've been an outspoken supporter of civil liberties. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that a bit, talk a little bit about your commitment to open government in principle, and then maybe specifically reference to your sunlight rule, which I believe is legislation that you filed in the Congress.
Yes. I generally make the comments that we've turned this whole issue on its head because the government was instituted to protect the people's privacy. And yet today the people's privacy is being violated. At the same time, government secrecy is growing by leaps and bounds, which is rather newing. And I want a much more open system where you can find out exactly what the government's doing. There would be certainly some times, especially in a time of war, where military plans would be important. But for the most part, I don't know very much that shouldn't be known to the people. Can you imagine what has been done by the CIA secretly over the last 50 years or so? I mean, it is unbelievable if you read all the books that have been written by CIA agents on how they go in. Right now, we have a CIA